I left home for university with a sense of hope and excitement, ready to embrace my future. My parents, on the other hand, seemed too eager to see me go. It wasn't the typical farewell I had imagined. They told me not to call them and that I shouldn't rely on them for anything anymore. Their words stung, but I convinced myself that it was simply a phase of growing up. It wasn't unusual for parents to be overly eager for their children to leave the nest, right? So I brushed it off, thinking it was just their way of letting go. The first year at university was everything I'd dreamed of. I made friends, learned new things, and began to carve my own path. I was doing well in my courses, keeping a part-time job, and trying to stay connected with my family, despite the silence on their end. My calls were unanswered, and when I sent emails or texts, the responses were always short, distant, and curt. Yet, I kept convincing myself that everything was okay, that maybe they were busy with their own lives. Christmas break came around, and I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to reconnect with my parents. I booked a flight back home, eager to surprise them. The idea of returning to familiar surroundings, of sitting down with them over the holidays, filled me with warmth. When I walked through the door, I expected to be greeted with smiles, laughter, and perhaps a bit of fuss. But instead, I was met with cold silence. It was as though they barely recognized me. My mother didn't even make eye contact. My father sat silently in his chair, his gaze fixed on the TV. There was no warmth, no love, no welcome. I stood there for a long moment, unsure whether I was still in the right place. The house felt empty, like a shell of what it once was. I tried to start a conversation, but it felt like I was talking to a wall. It was the strangest feeling, a growing emptiness where the bond I had once shared with them should have been. That Christmas, there were no presents, no shared meals. They didn't even ask how I was doing or what I had been learning. I had nothing to say to them at that point. I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to convince myself that maybe they were just tired, or maybe the holiday season had them stressed. I couldn't understand it, but I tried to rationalize it. As the school year ended, I made plans to return home. This time, I called them ahead of time, ready to share the excitement of my first year, the things I had learned, and the goals I had set for the future. But when I called, the phone rang and rang. No answer. I tried again, and still no answer. I thought they might be out, so I left a message, figuring I would catch them later. The next day, I called again, and again, but this time the phone didn't ring. Instead, it went straight to a disconnected number message. I was immediately filled with dread. My mind raced. Had something happened to them? Was there an emergency? I tried calling every possible number I had for them. No luck. Desperation set in. I tried calling relatives, but no one seemed to know where my parents were. Panic surged through me, and in a final attempt to find answers, I called my grandmother. I could hardly explain what had happened, and I was on the verge of tears. When she finally picked up, she didn't sound surprised by my panic, but instead, her voice was oddly calm. She told me that my parents had moved away, but that she had their new number. However, she also said she couldn't give it to me until I finished university. Then, before I could ask any questions, she abruptly hung up the phone. I was left, standing there in complete disbelief. My parents, my own flesh and blood, had left without telling me. The phone call ended, and I was left feeling completely abandoned, with no clue about where to go or who to turn to. I had no money, no family support, and nowhere to go. I sold every possession I had, anything of value, anything that could get me through this horrifying situation. I barely had enough to survive on the streets. For a month, I lived on nothing but scraps and change, a shadow of the person I once was. Every day felt like a battle against the world. The one thing I had going for me was my determination. I spent my nights looking for work, even if it was just small tasks here and there, just enough to keep me going. I saved every penny I could, rationed my meals, and found small ways to make my money last. During that time, I realized that the world owed me nothing. I was on my own now, and if I was going to survive, it would be because I fought tooth and nail for it. I started teaching myself software development from the little resources I had. I had always been good with computers, but I never thought of it as a career. I had dreamed of doing something proper, something my parents would be proud of, like becoming an accountant. But now that dream felt hollow. So I turned to my hobby of coding, and it became my lifeline. It was a long, grueling road. I worked at odd jobs, did freelance gigs, and stayed up late nights learning programming languages. Slowly but surely, I built a foundation. I applied for a job at a small software company, and after a few months, I was promoted. The promotion didn't stop there. Over time, my skills grew, and I moved from one company to the next, each time climbing higher, working harder. Years passed, and with each year, I gained more experience, more success, and more confidence. After 25 years of relentless effort, I had climbed the corporate ladder and became a vice president at a major software company. My wealth was no longer a dream, it was a reality. I was living the life I had always imagined, but this time, it was all mine. I had built it with my own hands. 2 weeks ago, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was my mother. I couldn't believe it at first. She sounded strangely upbeat, as though nothing had happened. She invited me to dinner, and I didn't know what to think. I had spent years working to build a life without them, and now they were back, as though nothing had changed. I knew I had to go. I needed answers. When I arrived at the restaurant, I could feel the weight of years of anger and abandonment boiling inside me. My mother and father were sitting at a table, waiting. They looked the same, but there was something off about them. The warmth I once felt for them was long gone. My father started speaking first, with the same smug tone he had always used. He told me he had left because I chose my hobby of software development over a stable career as an accountant. "We tried to teach you," he said, "but you didn't listen. You chose the wrong path." I looked at him, stone-faced, and replied, "At least my hobby made me a millionaire." The silence that followed was deafening. They didn't know what to say. But then they dropped the bomb. My parents, the ones who had abandoned me, the ones who had made me sell my belongings and struggle on the streets, now had the audacity to ask me for money. "2 million, my father said flatly. "For raising you, for making you the person you are. We deserve something for that, don't we?" I stared at him, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. After everything they had put me through, the abandonment, the cruelty, the years of silence, they had the nerve to ask for $2 million as if they were entitled to it. I stood up, calmly placed my napkin on the table, and walked out without saying another word. There was nothing left to say. I had fought for everything. And I would never allow anyone, especially my parents, to take credit for it. They weren't part of my success. I had become who I was without them, and I would never let them leech off my accomplishments. As I walked out of the restaurant, I knew I had won. I had the last laugh, and it was sweeter than any apology they could ever offer.